are live. Welcome everybody to a mighty mystery interview. I'm your on-air host, Sara DiVello, and I am thrilled to be here today with John Vercher, author of 3/5, which just this week got nominated for an Anthony Award. It's already been nominated for an Edgar Award and was named a Best Book of the Year by Chicago Tribune. Oh my God, absolutely incredible. John, congratulations. Tell us about your book.
Thank you very much. So I'll just give you the standard elevator pitch. It's pretty well practiced at this point.
Give it to us.
3/5 is about a biracial black man who has been passing for white his entire life. And on the night that his best friend gets out of prison, he discovers that he's become a radicalized white supremacist. And during the night of their reunion, they get into a fight that ends in a hate crime. And so the main character, Bobby, is forced to reconcile the lies of his past with the truth of his present as he tries to negotiate this very challenging and difficult situation that he now finds himself in.
Wow, that is very intense. Tell us, what is the genesis behind this book? Why this book? Where did it come from? Tell us the backstory.
It's a long one, so buckle in.
I will buckle in. I'm going to set it up, and I'm going to buckle right in.
So the seed of that story was planted actually more than 20 years ago. So I was a student at the University of Pittsburgh, and I had been taking a class in history of Black cinema. And one of the movies that we watched was called Imitation of Life, which was based on a novel of the same name. And it was a passing narrative, which was something that I had never heard of at that age. I was still just a teenager then. And being a mixed race man, the whole concept of passing and the storyline of the tragic mulatto was obviously very intriguing to me. And so I sought out more narratives like that. There were books like Passing by Nella Larson, in sort of the crime world, books like Devil in a Blue Dress, Walter Mosley. So, but at least from what I could find, there were not a lot of stories like that. And so I started to think about what it would be like to write one of those stories myself in a more modern context, which is why the novel is set in the mid 90s, because that's sort of when I was thinking about it. And it was also a time when we had just come out of the unrest in LA after the Rodney King verdict, and then we're smack in the middle of the OJ trial. So discussions about race were loud and at the forefront. And so it felt right to sort of set the book in that setting. But I originally conceived of it as a screenplay, and actually even got it shopped around to a couple of production companies, but I was a kid and the writing wasn't great. And so after I graduated as an English major, I decided that eating and a job was probably a little more conducive to my health than writing. And so I ended up going into healthcare, sort of following my parents' footsteps, and shelved the idea for a long time. But it was sort of always talking at me in the background. And so about 20 years later, and after about 10 years in healthcare, I was miserable. And my wife knew that the reason I was miserable was because I had this creative side of me that was wanting to come back out. And she encouraged me to go back for my MFA. And I did that. And 3/5 was actually my thesis.
Oh, wow. That is such a cool story. And it's amazing that it is 2 decades long. So 20 years, this book has been percolating inside you. And then it came out first in a screenplay iteration and now repurposed for your book as your thesis for your MFA. How similar is the book to that screenplay?
I'd say thematically almost identical, but there have been some significant changes in the characterization, more or less. And I'd say even some thematic changes based on just the things that I've learned as I grew from a teenager to a 20-something-year-old to now in my mid-40s. So there was a lot of life experience that I couldn't inject into it then that I was able to do now.
Ooh, yeah. So life experience, your own experience, your perspective, also from a young man in a cinema class undergrad to
Mhm.
now obviously having an MFA, 10 years of work experience in healthcare, plus the transition from being a screenplay, which I know is very different, even though I've never written on, to a book. So a lot of different shifts, but the genesis of the idea has remained the same.
Yes, absolutely.
Wow, that is so fascinating. And I love that it was in you and sort of waiting to come out, like begging to come out all along.
Clawing. Yeah.
Tell us about the title. Did it arrive? Was that the title of the screenplay, or did the screenplay have a different title?
No, that was the title of the screenplay as well. So it refers to the Three-Fifths Compromise, where blacks were only considered three-fifths human, and that was used to manipulate the right to vote and the Electoral College, and it also was involved in the Dred Scott decision. And it felt appropriate to me because the main character Bobby has really defined himself by his race, and in doing so denied who he was, which had a ripple effect for not just him but for the other characters in the book in a very devastating way. And so the Three-Fifths Compromise had that same effect on us, and so it felt appropriate to, when people are of mixed race, we're often referred to as half. There's always some fractioning of a person, and so it felt appropriate to me to title the book after really the ultimate fractioning of a person defining who they were by a number instead of who they are as a person.
Mm. That's so interesting. Actually, one of my dearest friends is mixed race. So her dad is a white guy from Worcester, and her mom is Afro Caribbean,
Okay.
and she identifies as an Irish American Afro Caribbean princess. Very dear friend of mine, and the concept of identity, is so interesting, and I think even as you said, more complex. When you exist in a society that wants to put everybody in a very neat box.
Right.
And it's interesting because this book has been percolating inside you for 2 decades, for 20 years, and yet and sort of started to generate, as you said, during the O.J. Simpson trial, the Rodney King beatings, and now 20 years later, we are in the midst of tremendous conversations, tremendous tension around racial justice, social justice. So it's interesting that it's been 20 years and yet it's still so timely.
Yeah, the unfortunate circumstance is that it's kind of, that topic is timeless instead of timely, and that is the sad and tragic and kind of violent history of our country. I've often had people tell me, "Oh, this really came out at the right time." It really wouldn't have mattered when it came out. This is whether, it just depends on the level at which we're talking about it. So
Mm.
it just happens to be that we're back at that level again.
Yeah, that is interesting. And you're right. It's about the level that we're talking about it. So are you finding that more people want to talk about it at a deeper level, or what's that been like for you with this book right now?
It's interesting. I've seen that it's gotten more attention as of late, and I say that in a way that I'm very grateful for the attention it got in the first place. But it does seem to be a part of more conversations, which is exactly why I wrote it. This was not just about writing a book; it was about giving some voice to that narrative, but on a more personal level, and less of a teaching sort of didactic type of way. It was really um, uh, the fact that it's generating conversation is exactly why I wrote it. So I'm happy that it's doing that.
Yeah, and thank you for doing that. Thank you for writing this book. Thank you for contributing to the conversation, for starting the conversation, for writing a book that is timeless, about issues that are very big and very hard. How are you doing during these times? What are things like in Philadelphia? What are things like for you? How are you spiritually? How are you emotionally? How's it going over there?
It's good to have family. It's good to have close friends to be able to talk to and share how these events are seeming to happen again. And it's not easy, but it's a lot harder for others than it is for me. And so I'm always cognizant of that. I'm very fortunate to have the family around me that I do. So it's hard to complain as trying as all this is emotionally. Um, I try to keep that in perspective and do what I can to give voice to help progress the movement and just again keep everything in perspective. It's a lot worse for others than it is for me.
Mm, I like that. Give voice to it. And that is the way that you've been called to serve, at this time. And this is who you are, a writer, giving voice to these stories and to these perspectives. Tell us about your writing process. Do you rise with the sun? Do you flow easily? Do the words pour out of you? Or are you kind of, that one of the, sort of, you have to claw your way through the desert for every word? What's it feel like for you? What's it look like?
It depends on what I'm writing. This book was obviously very disciplined because it was part of my MFA program, and so there were
Okay.
portions of it that were due after a certain period of time for my mentor to evaluate and revise, and so that was very rigid and structured, which was great because I needed that. Having been away from writing for so long, I had forgotten more than I remembered about craft and mechanics and just the discipline of sitting down and writing. When it comes to nonfiction, because I do write some personal essays from time to time. Those I actually do very last minute. But I think about them for quite some time.
Mm.
I don't. I will go for days without actually writing on a topic if I've been given one, or if there's one that's in my head, and then I will sit down and just put the whole thing on paper. For the second book that I've just written, this was a very different process. Actually, it was because I pivoted from writing a book I thought I was supposed to write into pivoting the book that I wanted to read. The words actually came very easily. I was getting probably 1,000 word, 1,100 word days every day, and I wasn't always an everyday writer. I tended to sit with things for a while and then write larger swaths. So, long answer short, it varies. I guess since I've only written a second book at this point, I'm probably still figuring it out a little bit.
I love that. And I like what you said about stepping away from the book that you thought you were supposed to write,
Hmm.
the book that you needed to write.
Hmm.
So the idea was percolating in you for 20 years, but how long did it actually take you with your MFA program to get it onto the page?
So the 2 years that the program took,
Okay.
because there were some false starts and stops, even having had the idea in my head, that it still wasn't fully formed, even after maybe the first 6 months of the program. So there was a lot of back and forth before I really found the thread that took me all the way through.
And it's interesting too, because when you were telling us about the book, I mean, it's already so tense. Like just that opening part, this kid is passing for white. His best friend comes out of prison, has become radicalized white supremacist. I mean, already it's like I'm sweating. All right. So it's interesting that you're then talking about developing this thread from there. Tell us about that.
And I'm not sure I understand the question in terms of what way.
So you start out with this big, I think you're just talking about how in terms of your process.
So what I struggled with in the beginning of the MFA was really finding the inciting incident that set things forward. I didn't
Okay.
I didn't want it to be a plot heavy book. I wanted a character based book, but
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want it to be so character based that it was just characters standing around thinking thoughts. I wanted there to be something that drove them forward. Um, I think sort of like the best noir and some of the literary novels that I like to read still have something that is propelling the characters to get out of trouble.
Mm.
There was a quote that I had learned at the program, and I've since found out it's been attributed to a bunch of different writers. I think Vonnegut was the last person I heard it was attributed to, but it was, some of the best books are where you put your characters up in a tree and throw rocks at them, and to see how they react, and to see how they're going to get out of that situation. And so that's where I think finally finding that thread to say, okay, this is what's going to kick off these events in the lives of these characters.
Okay, I had not heard that phrase. So thank you for sharing that. I had not heard that phrase attributed to anyone or at all. So thank you for that. That will stay in my head. The rock throwing trees thing. Okay, yeah. So when you were throwing the rocks up
Mhm.
there, how did that go for you? Was it unexpected? Are you a plotter or a pantser?
Definitely not a plotter, because again, I'm not. I don't. I much prefer books that are about characters in trouble and how they're getting out of it. Sometimes that trouble becomes part of the plot, but I don't. I feel like I have. It's more interesting for me to, whether writing or reading, to follow the character's journey. What are their motivations? Why are they doing what they do, as opposed to some event that or some end that they have to get to, as opposed to why they're getting there, if that makes any sense.
That does make sense. So what are some of these noir character driven stories that you like to read? Tell us who you like to read.
Oh man, they probably veer a little more towards literary, although I get, classifying the genres is kind of that whole idea of putting things in a box. But
Yeah.
the books that I love, Matt Johnson is one of my favorite writers. He's a Philadelphia-based writer. Jesmyn Ward, I can read anything she writes. Ernest Gaines' books before he passed. Also a huge James Baldwin fan. Um, More recently, Maurice Carlos Ruffin is a fantastic writer. I loved his debut novel. Um, who R.O. Kwan, loved her debut, The Incendiary. So there, again, these are all very sort of character-based books where there are still things happening, but they're much more about um, how these characters are managing the life that they're leading.
Okay, cool. What is one book that has changed your life? It doesn't have to be just one. That was too much pressure. I'm sorry.
Man, yeah, that's a tough one.
I'm going to back it up.
No, I'll go with that. I think one that really deeply impacted me was Matt Johnson's Loving Day, because it was one of the first books that I read that really tackled the ideas of identity for mixed race people, but did it in such a satirical, sort of biting, caustic way, but it was still like really touching. And I posted recently, like it's one of the few books I remember deliberately slowing down because I didn't want to finish.
Oh, I love that. The books where you're like, no, I don't want it to end. I
Yeah,
must go slower. You start to pace yourself. You're like, just one page.
yeah.
Oh, I love that. So, John, you are not only a writer, you are a teacher of writing. In fact, you've taught at Chestnut Hill College.
Mhm.
What is some of the best writing advice that you've gotten and would like to share? And what's the worst writing advice that no one should ever listen to?
I'll start with the best. It goes back to what helped me get through the second book was always write the book you want to read, not the right. Don't write the book you think you're supposed to write, or somebody that or write the book somebody tells you need to write. Um, because I did that and ended up scrapping like 10,000 words because I got to a point where I was forcing a square peg into a round hole. It just didn't work.
Mm,
So if you write the book you want to read, there are going to be other people that want to read it. I think that's the best advice I've ever gotten.
I
I
love
think,
that. Who gave you that advice?
I gotta say I got that from multiple people. The faculty at the MFA were really good. People that I've met within the program who are also writers, some of whom I'm still really good friends with, um, sort of gave me that same advice when I was struggling with the second book, and um, so yeah, I can't ascribe it to just one person.
Okay. And what's the worst writing advice that you got and you've got to not pass it on? You've got to put an end to this vicious rumor.
I'm not a big fan of it's got to be ass and chair every day. I've never, that's never resonated with me. There are times when I've done that and never kept a word that I wrote. I do feel like there are times when the inspiration hits you, and there are times when it doesn't. There are times when you need to just go for a run or take a shower and think about the things that you want to write before you sit down and do it. So while it's not the worst advice, it was the worst advice for me. Um, That's probably what I would say.
Yeah, thank you for saying that, because I think there is a lot of pressure that, if you're not doing it every day, then you're not a real writer, or you're not doing it, seriously enough, or whatever. And it's so much pressure. It's exhausting.
Hmm.
So
Yeah,
I think
I've
it's good.
never agreed with that. Reading is writing. Thinking about writing is writing. It's as long as you actually do get to a point where you're sitting down and putting it on the page, then whatever your process is the process that works.
Okay, cool. I like that. I like that a lot. What's one of your favorite scenes for, because another thing you said is that you're sort of a contemplative writer. Like, you
Hmm.
let something percolate in your brain, whether it's a personal essay or your book, for some amount of time, and then it flows out of you more easily, it sounds like.
Yeah. It definitely takes me some time to, especially if I have if I come to a point where there needs to be a turning point for the character, where there needs to be some flip into the sort of next act or the next stage. Yeah, that doesn't always just come just from sitting down and putting it on paper.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
I think you said favorite scene. Is that what you were
Yeah,
asking?
tell us.
Well, I don't want to give too much away if nobody's read it yet, but
Okay, don't give it
there is
away.
no. There's a scene that comes halfway ish through the novel where there's a confrontation in a restaurant, over the facts of the OJ trial between some
Mm.
of the main characters and some of the secondary and tertiary characters that, um, leads to an unexpected confrontation. That's probably.
It's interesting how the OJ trial is still so much a part of our culture. I was actually just talking about it with someone a few days ago. I mean, it's
Hmm.
crazy. It's been 20 years,
Yeah,
and yet we're all still thinking about it. We're all
yeah.
still talking about it. It's really kind of amazing when you think about that.
It really
Um,
wove itself into the fabric of the culture because there were so many different things at play.
yes.
You had a celebrity, but he was black, so it was is he going to get the shake that celebrities get, or is he going to get the treatment that most black men get at the hands of police and the law? And so it was. I think that's a big part of why it captured the imagination of the entire country. I mean, even the world. The book has sold in London. It's coming out there in October, and a lot of people are still very familiar with all of that going down. So it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, there were so many elements. I mean, there was the slow car chase that we all
Hmm.
watched. I mean, I
Hmm.
remember watching it. It was every single thing, and fitting the glove and Kato Kalin. I mean, every single part of it. It seemed like it was more of a TV show than actual reality, because there were so many dramatic,
Yeah,
crazy parts.
I mean, it essentially was. It became a TV show.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I took my dog for a walk yesterday, and we went into, the dog store to get a treat, because that's what we do every day. And the girl behind the counter was wearing a shirt that said, "If Marsha Clark can get through can get through 1995, I can get through today."
Most people might not know who Marsha Clark is. That's pretty funny.
Yeah. So do you picture this being best translated onto the big screen for a film, or a limited series Netflix?
I'm gonna pretend like I don't think about that, but I do. Man, it's tough. I could see it going either way, but think I would like to see it as a film before a series. I mean, it really depends on how deeply they would want to dive into the characters' backstories, because there are those in the book as well. It's not just all in the present. So that could be interesting in a series format, but I there's something about and maybe the aspiring screenwriter in me would also like to see it on the big screen. So
Yay! And tell us, who have you mentally cast in these roles?
all right, again, I should pretend like I haven't thought about this, but I totally have.
We all think about
Yeah,
it.
so I would love to see Wentworth Miller play Bobby, because
Okay.
he is a mixed race man who some people don't know that about him, although I think more do now. See, the father, I could totally see being played by Keegan Michael Key of Key and Peele. Even though he does comedy, I think he would really do dramatic stuff well. And I'd love to see Aaron played by Shia LaBeouf. I just think he's got the range to play a character like that.
I can see that. I can see that. Okay, I like all of these choices. We could get a fun meme going on social media where we have people put the faces they like in the squares. And I want to just make sure that if anybody has any questions for John, just type them in the chat box and I will be sure to answer them as well. So I don't want to dominate the conversation, but as I will keep asking. So if anyone has any questions about John's writing practice, his writing advice, his characters, his book, just put them right there and I'll be sure to share them. In the meanwhile, let's get back to once you wrote the book for your MFA, take us from the MFA to actually getting it published with Polis Books. What was that process like for you?
Kind of serpentine. I started off, it was definitely not a straight line. So here, this actually takes us back to your advice question about writing advice. Another good piece of writing advice that I did not follow was do not think that your thesis is ready to submit to agents just because you finished your thesis. The rejections piled long and high when I first started doing that.
Wow, really?
Yeah, but that I'm grateful for every one of them. I think I was actually really fortunate in that I didn't get a lot of form rejections. I got a lot of rejections that almost felt like an acceptance until the very end of the letter. So there was a lot of feedback that was very valuable to me. And the more rejections that I got that had consistent feedback were the changes that I began to make, because more than one person was seeing these issues.
Oh, interesting.
And so use that to then sort of do another round. And so found an agent. We shopped it for a while, and we just turned out to not be a good fit for each other. It was amicable. Everything was fine. It just we just parted ways and thought that I felt like it just wasn't the way to go. And so I went back and did some further revisions and started looking into independent publishers. Only because I had a friend who I graduated the MFA program with who was really well versed in some of the independent publishing houses. And so I started submitting again. And it was right around that time that Polis was beginning to put together Agora as their diversity focused imprint. And then fortunately around that same time I found an agent, and that was it.
Well, I think what's really interesting is the incredible acclaim that this book has gotten. So all of those poor jerks who passed on this book are sitting at home right now, pounding their heads into the desk saying, how could I have been so stupid?
No, because it wasn't the book that and that sounds that sounds overconfident, but it wasn't the book then that it is now, and that's from a lot of their feedback. It's from the editor that Chantel that I worked with at Agora. Like that's there's certainly no hard feelings there. If anything, what they had to say made it a better book. So I'm grateful for that.
Wow, you're really much nicer than I am. I would be like, yes, keep suffering. So yeah, because that's actually leads me into my next question. I was going to say, how do you know what feedback to keep versus what to go? Because one thing I think that writers really struggle with is whether they're being stuck in their vision and they should take the feedback, or whether, and Issa Rae has talked about this. So the founder of Insecure, the writer and star of Insecure. And so she originally sold it to someone else. And because she was new in this world, she took all feedback from the first place, and it became so watered down and so not her that they then ended up dropping her contract for the show. Wow. And which was the worst, most painful day of her life, I think she has shared. And so eventually she sold it to HBO, and and she was like, you know what, I'm not taking any feedback. This is my vision and I'm sticking to it. And obviously she has been tremendously successful. I don't know how many other Insecure fans there are in the audience, but I have been watching that show since day one. And I love it. And I think what's really interesting is the heart of that, right? Because how do you know whether you're watering down your vision, and it's going to become this piece of bland pablum where then, you're going to lose it, or you're being stubborn and stuck in ego. and
Yeah.
and it's a delicate balance. So was it that you just got the feedback multiple times and that's how you knew, or it resonated, or how did you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard not to take it all at first, right? Because you figure if they've rejected you, then they must be right, and you must be wrong. And so but if you don't look for consistency in the rejections, you're just going to end up chasing your tail, and until it's either bland or watered down, like you said, or you just don't recognize the book you wrote anymore. So
Mm.
I think it really comes down to, I mean, there's no right answer to this, but it really comes down to, for me in my own personal experience, it came down to consistency. If more than one or two or three were pointing out the same thing, or even something close to the same thing, then
Mhm.
that to me was a sign that, okay, can I still make that change and still be true to the book that I wanted to write? And if I could do those things, then it was worth doing as far as I was concerned.
Okay, that's really helpful. That's so interesting. Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
Oh my gosh, I feel like we've been talking for 2 minutes, but I realize we've been talking for half an hour, so we've got to get to the lightning round and wrap this up. Let's get to know the real John Vercher, who I'm going to put you under my mighty magnifying glass. Let's get to know this man, the man behind the book. Okay, who's one writer, dead or alive, you're dying to meet?
Oh, that's easy. James Baldwin.
James Baldwin. Okay,
Easy.
excellent. Easy. Okay, cool. Would you rather go camping with Bram Stoker or Anne Rice?
I would rather not go camping.
Okay, excellent. I have not gotten that answer before. I like it. Are you a dog person or a cat person?
Oh, definitely dog. We have two at home.
Yay, dog people. What's one word that gives you the heebie-jeebies that you will never use?
I don't know if there's one that gives me. I mean, there's ones that make me angry. But heebie-jeebies. I don't know. I kind of love words, like even the ones that are weird and like freak people out, like moist and stuff like that. It's just
Yeah, I like moist. I like moist chocolate cake. I don't know why that freaks people out.
I don't think I have one.
Okay, cool. Wow, I haven't gotten that answer before either. Would you rather be stuck in Area 54, an area obviously inhabited by aliens and sort of walled off by the government, with H.P. Lovecraft or Stephen King?
Definitely not Lovecraft. Yeah, King would be all right.
Okay. What is one thing you wish people would ask you that I haven't?
Man, see, you should have prepared me for these. This is
You're like, dude, you just put me under a magnifying glass. There's nothing
yeah.
you don't know anymore.
I'm not that interesting. Something I wish you had asked. Um, I'm drawing a blank. I'm sorry, I'm not good on the spot.
I have dug so deeply. I left no stone unturned. I consider this a win.
All right, I will take that answer.
Okay, cool. What was your favorite childhood book?
Favorite childhood book? It was actually a series. It was Bunnicula, the Celery Stalks at Midnight, and Holiday Inn. Those are the books I remember like just loving as a kid, because it was part of the Scholastic Book Fair, and every time they came around, like my parents were just I mean, I was taking home bags of books and I remember loving those three books. Just but I mean, then you got like, I mean, now you're talking all the Judy Blume books, um, Super Fudge and Tales of a Fourth Grade Nothing, How to Eat Fried Worms. Like I mean, there's so many. I don't know if I can name a favorite.
There's so many. Oh, and now you loved all these books as you're a kid, and now you write books. It's
Yeah.
so cool. Now you're one of those author people.
It's pretty cool to hand my book to my kids. There's no two ways about it. That was a heck of a moment.
That must have been such a moment. And you have gotten these amazing, amazing accolades. Again, I must shout it from the rooftops. Named a Best Book of the Year by the Chicago Tribune. Nominated for an Edgar Award and an Anthony Award. Oh my God, this is so amazing. John Vercher, congratulations. Thank you so much for joining us here on A Mighty Blaze.
Thank you for having me.
We look forward to cheering for you every step of the way and interviewing you for your next book.
Thank you very much for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you so much. All right.